What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Overwatch has many mysteries when it comes to its expansive world and cast of characters, but one mystery in particular stands out as being exceptionally notorious among others, and that's the Lijiang Tower wheelchair. At this point, the wheelchair may seem like old news and nothing that's really worth your time, but while most gave up on it long ago, I've been keeping an eye on this strange map object and watched as more and more developed around it. And now, more than a year after its discovery, we seemingly have enough information to not only confirm who survived the ape uprising on Horizon, but also reveal a much larger and darker plot behind the Chinese space corporation known as Lucheng Interstellar. Now, in order to make sense of all the puzzle pieces, the first thing we need to understand is the Lijiang Tower wheelchair and its history. So let me briefly summarize all the important details. On February 12th, 2018, Reddit user Karahi made a post highlighting a wheelchair which had suddenly appeared in one of the side offices of the Lijiang Tower control center map. This sparked rampant discussion and speculation in the community, and after personally doing extensive research into the matter, I discovered that the wheelchair had actually first appeared there on August 29th, 2017, in the same update which introduced Deathmatch as a new game mode. I'll have the video where I covered all my findings linked in the cards on screen if you're interested in seeing that, but anyways, this meant that the wheelchair had gone more or less unnoticed for nearly half a year before the community became aware of its addition in February. And given that it didn't seem to have any tangible impact on the Overwatch story or hero roster at the time, interest in the mystery soon fizzled out, and many people wrote it off as nothing important. But since I'm a sucker for mysteries, I continued to keep an eye on Lijiang Tower as time went on, and I wasn't disappointed. All was quiet for about 2 months until the 2018 Archives event. On April 10th, along with the launch of Retribution, the wheelchair once again became relevant when it was spontaneously relocated from the blue office on the right side of the control center map to the red office on the left. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this change was that the wheelchair now resided at the desk which featured a framed photograph of young gorilla Winston and his scientist father figure Harold Winston. This led to speculation about the possibility of Harold having actually survived the Horizon Ape uprising, and instead having escaped with injuries that now left him crippled and unable to walk. This theory became even more convincing when it was revealed that a second change had been made to Lijiang Tower in this exact same update. The Night Market news ticker, which had previously mentioned some seemingly arbitrary information on existing Overwatch heroes, now had 3 new lines of text running across it. When translated, these read, Lucheng Interstellar to start a new group of top aerospace projects, attempted to re-establish contact with the Horizon moon base, and most importantly, the current CEO was once a moon base scientist. And if even this wasn't suspicious enough, it should be noted that the attacker's second spawn room on the Horizon Lunar Colony map features the science team's spacesuits, with specific scientist names above each one, and lo and behold, the one and only suit missing belonged to Harold Winston. Altogether, everything seems to point towards Harold having survived and escaped the lunar colony with extreme injuries that have since bound him to a wheelchair. With this physical handicap and the Horizon Lunar Colony now essentially a lost cause, he's remained at Lijiang Tower where he eventually rose to the rank of CEO. At the surface, this seems like a satisfactory theory, and even a slightly optimistic outcome of what was otherwise thought of as a horrible tragedy. With Harold alive, Winston can reconnect with his old father figure and help to grow what has become his gradually shrinking family. But that's just it. If Harold's alive, and him and Winston could reconnect, then why haven't they already? This is where the Harold theory begins to fall apart. If he survived, he must have fled to Earth immediately after the ape uprising. With his body in such critical condition that he'd ultimately become wheelchair-bound, this escape in and of itself would have been incredibly difficult, if not flat out impossible. It is possible that whatever method he used to escape was fairly makeshift, and thus he may have sustained the crippling injury not at the hands of the violent apes, but rather upon crash landing back on Earth. Either way though, he would end up back at Lucheng Interstellar and continue on as an employee. But during this same time, Gorilla Winston would have himself fled to Earth and eventually joined Overwatch. Even if initially Winston hadn't realized that Harold survived the uprising, how do you explain the two of them not reconvening at any point after both of them returned? Given Harold's eventual rise to the position of CEO, and Winston's existence as both a genetic anomaly and top scientist in Overwatch, I think it's safe to say that it'd be downright impossible for neither one of them to ever become aware of the other's presence back on Earth. Given the immense amount of affection they're shown as having for each other in the Recall animated short, and the degree to which Winston is time and time again shown as somberly missing the man who was his father figure, I don't think there's any possible explanation for why the two wouldn't have reconnected. Aside from, of course, the fact that Harold never made it back to Earth. He never came back to work at Lijiang Tower, and in actuality, did perish along with the others back on Horizon. But if Harold met his untimely fate on the Lunar Colony, then who's the moon-based scientist who's the current CEO? Whose desk and wheelchair is in the red office on Control Center? For a long time, I was unable to come up with a good answer to these questions. That is until the release of Baptiste rather unexpectedly shed some light on things. More specifically, it was his teaser where we got the logged report from Captain Cuerva. Aside from Baptiste, the only name present in this log which we see anywhere else in the Overwatch world is Wen, which just so happens to be a name mentioned in one of the emails from the Horizon scientists. Now, as a quick interjection, I realize that we have no confirmation that the Trung-Le Wen from Baptiste's teaser is the same Wen mentioned in this email. In fact, given that Wen is the single most common surname in Vietnam, realistically it'd be unlikely that the two are the same or even directly related. But given that this is a fictional universe where character names are specifically selected by the writers, we're not talking about a realistic situation. I mean, how often do you see multiple characters within the same fictional universe who share a name, even very common names, unless there's a plot-relevant reason behind it? It's perhaps one of the most consistent story tropes ever to give every character in a story a unique name, which is why I think it's safe to say in this instance that the Wen we see mentioned in the Baptiste teaser is in fact the same person mentioned in the Horizon emails. Now, given that we don't have a first name for the Horizon Wen, I think the only real alternative to them being the same person would be if Blizzard intentionally named the two characters in this way as some kind of red herring. As I said, you don't give two characters the same name without a good reason, even if that reason is just to trick your audience. While these two could be siblings or even entirely unrelated, Blizzard knows that by dropping the same surname in two different locations, the community will pick up on the similarity. These names being the same isn't just a coincidence. But assuming that Blizzard isn't just trying to trick us, what exactly do we know about this suspicious Wen character? Starting with what we know from the Horizon emails, he was reportedly sent to the infirmary after being injured by one or more of the colony's gorillas. While this seems like fairly insignificant information, we can actually reduce quite a bit from it about the character. First off, it confirms that Wen was at one point stationed on Horizon, as that's literally the only place where the gorillas could have harmed him. Secondly, he sustained significant injury in the accident, so much so that he had to be sent to the infirmary. Now, whether this infirmary was in the colony or back on Earth is unclear, but either way, we know that he did eventually end up being sent back to Earth permanently. This is because when we go back to the room containing the scientist's spacesuits, there isn't one with his name on it. Sure, it's possible that there is just another inaccessible room elsewhere in the base, which is holding more suits than what we see here, but given that all the other scientist names we see from the emails and map are present in this room, I don't think that's the case. Furthermore, since his name isn't even marked on the walls anymore, it seems likely that he was sent back to Earth sometime well before the uprising which killed all the others, as it would have taken at least a little time to find a scientist to replace him, and even longer to go ahead and change the names in the spacesuit room. Now evidently incapable of doing work on the moon, likely as a result of whatever injuries he sustained, Wen would need to find some other work to do for Lucheng Interstellar. Given his previous position on Horizon, it would make sense for his new position to be relevant to the work he had been doing there, and thus ended up with an office inside Lijiang Tower. From there, he could easily work his way up through the ranks over the years, and I think you see where I'm going with this. Wen is the former moon-based scientist who now serves as Lucheng Interstellar's CEO. It's his wheelchair we see in the red office on Control Center, not Harold's, and he is the sole human survivor of the Horizon Lunar Colony. Not because he miraculously managed to escape the ape uprising, but because he was relocated due to his crippling injuries prior to the apes going full murder rampage. When you think about it, this scenario makes a heck of a lot more sense than Harold having somehow survived, especially considering how we see Winston remembering him in present day. I will admit though that this doesn't explain why Harold's spacesuit is missing from the Horizon Lunar Colony, or why there's a picture of Harold and young gorilla Winston on Wen's desk in Lijiang Tower. However, I can think of a few possible explanations for these as well. Given the bond Winston and Harold had with each other, I could easily see Winston having taken the spacesuit with him as a keepsake upon leaving the colony. We don't ever see the suit again anywhere on Watchpoint Gibraltar or anything, but it seems like a realistic possibility, especially given how many other Horizon relics we see him still holding on to this day, including Harold's own glasses. And as for the desk photograph, this one is a bit trickier. My first assumption would be that it signifies Harold and Wen as having been close to each other, possibly being even more than just friends. However, another aspect to consider is the fact that this picture has always been on this desk, and hasn't changed or moved at all in relation to the wheelchair being added or switching offices. While story-based map changes are often seen as being retcons to the world itself, what if in this case, the introduction of this chair was actually signifying an in-universe event having transpired? Like Doomfist trashing the Nambani airport, the appearance of the wheelchair may have been the result of Wen moving into a new office in the present-day Overwatch timeline. This would also explain the chair's transition from the blue office to the red one, which just so happened to coincide with the news ticker starting to mention the Lucheng CEO. The chair's relocation wasn't Blizzard retconning it having been put in the wrong spot originally, but rather Wen being elected as CEO and moving into his new managerial office. This would mean that the picture isn't tied to him specifically, and thus isn't even necessarily relevant to this mystery at all. While it's definitely not the most satisfying explanation, I think this photo may just be a bit of map flavoring, which doesn't play into the mystery surrounding who owns the wheelchair. Now, while so far I've been focusing on Wen as the injured Horizon survivor and Lucheng CEO, I have yet to touch on the other and possibly more significant side of him, which is that he's working for Talon. In the Baptiste teaser, his position at Talon is revealed to be that of senior analyst, and seemingly oversees an indeterminate number of Talon agents. This is strikingly similar to what we've seen with Sanjay Korpal, who's been shown to be both a Vishkar corporate official as well as a Talon inner council member, and could very well be suggesting that, like Vishkar, Lucheng Interstellar is a company operating under Talon's influence. Also, given that Wen seemingly holds a higher position than Sanjay in his respective corporation, and Sanjay is shown as being part of Talon's inner council, there's a good chance that Wen as well is on this same council. While it's unlikely that he's one of the individuals seen here at the end of Masquerade, given that none of them appear to be in a wheelchair, Wen may still hold significant sway in the organization overall. Beyond this, however, it's unfortunately difficult to theorize anything further. The hidden writing we can see on Baptiste's teaser, which so far hasn't really amounted to anything, may be tied to Wen in some way or another. Also, we don't know how exactly he got involved with Talon, or to what degree this connection may be responsible for his own rise through the ranks at Lucheng Interstellar. And considering Talon's possible influence in controlling the space-oriented corporation, you also have to wonder about them possibly having a hand in other major events. There's plenty of evidence to suggest foul play being involved with the fall of Horizon, so is it too much to try and make a connection back to Talon here too? That's a theory for another day, but for now, I think we've successfully identified who really survived the Ape Uprising, and possibly further pulled back the curtain regarding Talon's true influence on the world of Overwatch. Will Wen be a future playable hero? Maybe. I would not be surprised to see Blizzard add a wheelchair-bound hero, but I definitely wouldn't recommend getting your hopes up for that being a thing anytime soon. Also, as I said, there's the possibility possibility of Blizzard pulling a red herring by intentionally giving two different characters the same name. But even this raises suspicion, as it suggests that there is in fact something going on here which they may just be trying to obscure until the time is right. There's a ton more to be revealed about this mystery, and I'm going to be keeping an eye out for anything new that happens in the months and years ahead. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts regarding the mysteries of Lijiang Tower and Talon, so feel free to leave any thoughts or theories you have in the comments down below. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and share it with a friend if you really liked it. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and hit up the bell to never miss any of my future Overwatch content. This is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.